Okay, we are back. Welcome everybody to I Don't Know Yet. I'm very, very excited because this is a guy that I've been trying to get in here for quite some time. And bless his heart, because he is such a great guy. He's obviously busy doing a lot of things. So I'm really grateful that our times finally aligned. So welcome to the show, Matt. I'm so glad that you could be here. For anyone who doesn't know, I quite commonly bring on people that I know, people that I don't know. Matt is a fellow home group member and just somebody that I've always really admired, looked up to, go to sometimes for advice. He's a pillar of mine. And over the last couple of years, you've just really been somebody who I admire to be, which is trying to constantly level up. So welcome.
Thanks for having me.
I'm really glad to have you here.
6 reschedules later.
Oh my gosh, right?
Yeah.
But we made it work.
Yeah.
We made it work. So
I think we've been trying since last year this time.
It's been a while.
Yeah.
It has been a while. But I mean, that's the gifts of recovery, right? Things happen in our lives move forward. And I was more than happy to wait for you.
I'm glad it worked out.
No problem. Yeah, me too. So I gotta be honest, when I bring somebody on the show, I always like to give them the option to pick a topic because I want them to have input and have things to talk about. So in preparation of figuring out what you were going to pick as a topic, I'm not going to lie, I was very excited when you picked this topic because I didn't even realize how much I was going through this myself until you brought it up. So I'm really, really excited. Why don't you tell everybody what we're going to be talking about today?
Yeah, I think I have like a general idea of where to go through, but some of my biggest pillars in these rooms talked about at the very beginning that, like, we always say that the newcomer is the most important, and fundamentally I believe that. Right. Without newcomers, we don't continue to grow as a fellowship and as these different programs. But, some of my biggest pillars had always said that, like, it's not the person in their first year that's the most important. It's the people in their second, third, fourth, fifth years. Right. We see a really big gap in people taking those kind of middle years. Right. And at first it was like, no, like, I'm obviously the most important, right, in my first year, because, like, why wouldn't I be the most important?
Right.
I have no clue what I'm doing. And the further along I've gone, the more I think I really started to understand what they were actually talking about, right? And, there's a lot of pretty universal adages, I think, that float around these rooms of, like, second years, what worked in your first year doesn't work in your second year. What worked in your second year doesn't. And I was like, yeah, that's stupid. And I'm really lucky. I think lucky is the word, but I'm grateful for the fact that I was pretty much able to kind of like float through my first few years. There wasn't a lot of things that had kind of come my way that were like life altering or earth shattering, or things that, like, if I wasn't really, really working this program, probably would have taken me out. But it wasn't until, and don't get me wrong, I had a couple really bad bouts in those years too of not practicing these principles. Right. But it wasn't until very, very recently that I realized that, like, I've kind of gone on without really changing what I was doing and kind of using the tools that worked for me yesterday and hoping that they'd work for tomorrow. And I don't think I ever stopped to realize that, like, maybe they weren't working anymore. And it wasn't until things kind of came to a head for me towards the end of last year that I realized, I was like, okay, no, like, this is exactly what they were talking about. And it wasn't that, like, I don't believe, first of all, for me, like, I truly don't believe that I have a relapse in me. I think that I struggle too much with, like, the pride and the shame that kind of surrounds this whole deal for me, that I think that, unfortunately, like, I would make the supreme sacrifice. And don't get me wrong, I wouldn't do it sober, but, like, I wouldn't have a long run relapse in me. I think I would ultimately end up taking my own life. And that was kind of the realization that I kind of got to, was like, I don't want to drink and use. And it's not that I had any kind of suicidal ideation, but it was like, something's not working, and it's really, really not working. And how quickly that happened was really alarming. I'm grateful for the fact that, like, I have people around me that were able to kind of, show me where I might be missing certain things and allowed me to kind of double down a bit more. So I think why I'm so passionate about this is I don't think we talk about it enough. I think you know, a big part of the problem is we kind of get a few years under our belt, so we start sponsoring people, and I think we kind of have this illusion that we're supposed to just be well all the time. And I first of all, I don't think that's realistic. Second of all, I think it sets really harmful expectations for new people to think that like you come in, get some time, do the things that we're told to do, and then everything will be great.
Right. Yeah, I really relate to all of that. I know that when I took my 4 years, which was, oh gosh, in 9 days, a year ago, I remember one of the things that I spoke about, because I thought about it so passionately, I remember saying year 1 was about getting sober, and year 2 was about staying sober. In year 3, I really learned how to live sober. And so my brain had this, well, not my brain, my addict brain, because this is what our brains do, literally put me in a position this year, I think, of being like, good job. You did it. You've got it. You've consistently done it. You're good. And even though some of my disciplines are not great, some of them are fucking on point, but I still find that a lot of the stuff that I was able to do last year, I'm finding it very difficult to do this year. I've had several episodes come out last year about, you know, going through the process of Chase and I being together was a very big snowball of jumping out of fear and into faith. The Coles Notes version, he had went through hard times, didn't really want to ever commit to anyone again. He was very clear about that. We had a connection. It was he wanted to move away and wanted to start a new life. And he was very, very open and honest. So my brain was like, okay, I should live in the present, lean into joy, take advantage of what I can today, not worry about tomorrow, not worry about yesterday. And I really focused with God on being present and leaning into joy and having faith that if I'm doing what I think God would have me do, no matter what happens, I'm going to be okay. And I practicing this and praying for him. I had a daily prayer every morning, praying for his best and highest good, no matter what that meant for me. And like, what a beautiful experience. And this whole thing, it skyrocketed me into this place of faith. Then I really understood what that looked like, what that felt like. Anything that came my way, what is God trying to teach me? Anything that happened, okay? But look at the positive. What did we learn in all this? I was like this, I think about people saying it to me now, and I'm like, ugh, like stop, right? But I was just this, and to all my sponsees, it was just this constant, everything's good, no matter what, learn, grow, push through it, everything's going to be just fine. And I really believed it. And I'm still struggling because this past year hasn't looked anything like that. We've gotten to a really great place now. We're together. That's awesome. But my ability to stay in the present, my ability to lean into joy, my ability to not worry about the future, all of these things that I spent so much time working to achieve, and I got them, I feel them slipping away. And the amount, it's so easy. Something happens now and my brain immediately goes, well, isn't this just typical? Of course I don't feel well this morning on the day that I'm going to record that I've planned for 3 weeks. Of course I don't feel good, right? That's not how I would have reacted to things a year ago. And it's interesting because you do these disciplines and you read this book and you give back on this work and you do all these things consistently all the time. And I'm definitely in the same place that you are. I think I might be a little bit behind you. So maybe behind the scenes, maybe you could help me out as well. But I don't know where to adjust now. And It's a really weird kind of limbo place to be in because I'm not as happy as I was. And even though I'm there, and this is where it gets even hard because this is where the guilt starts to come in too, because my brain, and I saw this posted a bunch of memes over the last little bit. The things that I prayed for the most when I got sober, I have every single one but one. Everything I prayed that I hoped that I would be able to achieve or get out of sobriety, I have. So now what?
Right.
You know what I mean?
I think you alluded to, I think, what two of the biggest problems are in that, right? I think when we look at, I believe at its core, the same kind of outlook that you have, that like year one is really the focus is getting sober, year two, staying sober, year three, living sober. Now what, right? Now what? I've learned how to get sober and stay sober. I've learned how to live sober, but now what? Right? And I think this is where, we really start to see people taper off. They say that like boredom is the devil's playground, right? Well, like, if I don't really try to do things that were really out of my wheelhouse before, which ultimately takes a hell of a lot of work, right? I'm able to do the bare bones minimum, the things that were able to get me sober and keep me sober, and that's fine. But I think to level up from this point takes probably a hell of a lot more work than I even did at the beginning, right?
Right.
Now I have an understanding of the literature. Now I have an understanding of these principles. But if I want to level those up, it's not as simple as just reading the book with a sponsor and then trying to do 9 through 12 to the best of my ability anymore, right? This is going to take a lot more hours and a lot more time, right? And I think that's kind of where this loophole comes in, is around that time frame, things just kind of get stagnant or they get boring, right? And I don't think I recognize that they did, right? But like my life has become pretty routine at this point. At this point, like I really only go to my home group, right? Unless I'm in need of sponsees, but by the grace of God, I haven't had that need in some time. So I go to my home group on Monday and I book in 3 times a week with my sponsees, and I fill in with, hospitals and institutions related service work where I can. But that's it, right? And that's just kind of become my life. And, for the last few years, that was cool, but now what? Right. And I think the second part to this and something that I don't think I really noticed until I was able to go back and, another part of my problem, I think, is I never went back and did another full inventory. I had been challenged a lot over the last few years of like, I had a desire to go and find a new sponsor and do a full set of steps. And, but I had people challenge me and say, well, like, how's your first set going? Right. And for the longest time, my first set wasn't going great. I wasn't doing amends. My 11s were still deplorable at best, So a big focus of mine around that like 2 to 4 mark was like, okay, well, like maybe I should figure out what it means to actually do my first set properly, start doing my amends, start working on 11s, right? And I did that. But now what, right? And I when I finally was like, okay, like I gotta like stop ignoring this. And I think I do really need to sit down and put pen to paper and figure out what's going on. And in doing that, I realized that I think, and this is a real personal value statement, I don't think that we're designed to understand God. I think that like once we think that we understand God, we're probably leaning into a bit of a God complex. So to find a God of my own understanding to me is a lofty and I think impossible goal, so to speak. So, but I took that a little too literally, I think, because like once I kind of found a connection that worked for me, I kind of just stuck with that and I never tried to change what that was. And for me, it's really not anything, right? I did kind of like have my awakening, so to speak, in a sweat lodge, and I was sitting and looking at the mountains and I was like, oh, wait, this is it, right? This is all bigger than me, right? But that's kind of where it ended. And as much as I think that I've like worked through my resentment and organized religion and things like that, it's become apparent to me that I haven't, right? And in going through this inventory, I realized that like I'm trying to turn my will and my life over to something that I think that I understand, but really I have no idea what it is, right? I think at the core of this, I fundamentally have faith, an abundance of faith that no matter what happens to me, this is God's will, good or bad, seemingly good or seemingly bad. I believe that it's God's will and I'm able to look at it that way. And that's great. But that's not enough, I don't think, to really give me a life of happiness and joy and abundance, right? If I'm just able to like take life as it comes and like even the bad stuff it's still all good, right?
Yeah.
And I think just a pile up of that and kind of moving in an unmarked direction, not really knowing where I was headed, not really having an objective to point my prayer and meditation towards, and then a buildup of just like, God either is or he isn't, and seemingly good and seemingly bad, and everything will just be okay because this is all God, really put me in a place where And it wasn't until I started some work with a professional outside of this program that it was kind of alluded to the fact that, like, I maybe am not quite as well as I think that I am, right? That a lot of the things that, and whether this all stems from trauma that I experienced over the years, and that's a whole other conversation, but, all of my defaults aren't normal, right? And I just have come to believe that they were, right? And I think a part of that, and the biggest part of that, is just like, well, like, I must be well, right? Because I don't have a desire to use drugs and alcohol anymore, and I wake up and I do this to the best of my abilities, and I have faith that God will take care of me, so I must be well, right? And it wasn't, I don't think, until an overload of really undealt things from these last few years kind of piled up on my plate where I was really handed a pretty heavy hand of like, okay, no, maybe you're not, right? And that's, I think, really what the future looks like now, and especially, going through like these next few months to this next year for me, really is like, okay, like, if I'm not well, first of all, that's okay. But like, if I'm not well, how do I get well? Right? Because there's a lot of things, right? There's a lot of things.
Fascinating. You're making me want to go venture out and look at stuff. In listening to you say that, something sparked in my brain. So, I wonder if this is like a weird trauma reaction. I don't know. Okay, so Jace and I have this wonderfully healthy relationship where we've talked about our wants and our needs, and I've always told him what I need is for you to reassure me and match my effort. I need to know that I'm not in this alone, and I need you to tell me that you're there. And he's been great. And I remember I've talked about it in a couple of different episodes, like the first time that I had to have a hard conversation with him. It really wasn't that hard because when you're around the right people, it's really not. But I was terrified. It was actually one of the first ones was actually a conversation in this room, and I just broke down and started to cry. In a few months we will have kind of been back together for a couple of years now, and it boggles my mind. I've always chalked it up to just a defective character, addict brain, addict behavior. He calls it a girl brain. But the intensity, pardon me, of the anxiety and the fear that pulses through my body when I need to talk to him about something that I think he might not take well. I might hurt his feelings. It might spark a fight. We've literally never had one. We've had nothing but healthy communication. We know that we're not in competition. Like there's no reasonable reason why I should have any of these feelings. But I literally had to tell him something came up, and it was so silly. It was when we were going to take our next vacation. And he was looking through the calendar. He picked he's like, oh, maybe that would be good. And then on the phone to someone, he said, well, we're going away here. And then to someone else, he's like, yeah, so we're planning on doing it here. And I'm like, but I don't want to do it there, nor do I want to do it for that. And I don't want to do that. I'm like, okay, well, he said it twice, so I should probably talk to him about it. Instant fear, instant panic. I had to go sit down. I had to go hide from him. I had to sit down and I had to pray. And I literally, he was on the phone talking to somebody and I could hear him wrapping it up. And as it did, I felt my heart beating out of my chest. I just felt panicked and overwhelmed. And I'm like, I've had so many healthy conversations with this human being that I really challenged myself. I'm like, you can say this without breaking into tears. I know it's going to be a fine just come on. And I'm like, can we talk? He was like, of course we can. Because that's what he always says. And I said, I don't want to go away for 3 weeks here. I don't want to take my whole vacation. And I don't know if we'll have enough money and time. And he was like, oh, okay. Yeah. You never said, that makes sense. You wouldn't want to take your whole vacation in the first month of you never told me that. Sure. No problem. We'll figure it out. And I'm like, and just the sheer amount of damage and trauma that I put myself through. And this isn't like, I don't ever remember having any kind of like, I mean, I've had a couple shitty relationships where things like that happen, but I never had like parents that didn't listen or anything like that. So that's one of the things that I've been noticing that I'm struggling with, like starting to realize that I don't get to choose when my defects go away, right? God picks that and God takes them away. I don't do that and all these things. But this was just an example where like after the fact, I had to sit there for a minute and I was just like, why hasn't this improved?
Right.
I'm asking for help. I'm asking for the courage to do it tactfully and with respect. I'm getting the courage after asking for it to push through it. And time. This guy has never let me down. Not once. I've never brought something up where he wasn't very kind and gave me a safe space to say exactly what I needed to say and we didn't work it out. Every single time. So why am I so afraid to be rejected, to hurt someone else's feelings? Like it's like, but the actual physical response my body had, it was the first time I was actually aware of how hard it is for me to get through that kind of stuff.
This is where I'm struggling, right? Because I think I am very much a program guy, right? And for being so not a program guy for so many years that when I finally bought into this idea, and it gave me all of the positive results, probably plus an extra 150% on top of that, right? That I became so bought in on this that to me, any other idea of any other means to get well, I look down upon. Right. And I think where I'm at now is, like I used to hear the word trauma and a little bit, it's just, to me, it always felt like a cop out, right? It always felt like this is just an excuse to continue to act in defects of character and, and not do anything about it. Right. But like when I look back now, I'm really able to see some like pretty clear parallels in like behaviors that I've had since like a very, very young child that manifested into kind of the behaviors that I have today. And you can call them defects of character, sure. But it wasn't until, and I had tried sitting down with professionals in the past, right? But like I'd never been able to be even probably close to 50% honest with any of them.
Right.
Especially because like this is my first attempt since, being in recovery. So like all of my previous attempts were still in active addiction. So like I'm hiding what I'm using, how I'm using it, how much I'm using it. I'm hiding the things that happened to me. I'm hiding the things that I did to other people. So like any sort of response that I got from a professional in the field never really worked, right? Because like they were never given the tools to, to actually help me. And like now going in with an understanding that like, specifically in the area that I'm working in right now, this had become apparent that like the 12 steps had kind of ran its course in this for me, right? That at this point it was kind of necessary for me to go speak to somebody who was professionally trained in this area, right? And in doing so, and we've barely started at this point, we're only 5 or 6 sessions in, and coming to understand that like maybe some of my behaviors are, while sure they could be considered defects of character, maybe it's a little bit more than that. Right? That maybe these are things that are so deeply ingrained in me and behaviors that like I've been living in for so long that I don't know how not to. Right. And I can try to pray it away. And I have for a lot of it. Right. I've prayed and I've prayed and I've prayed and I've prayed. And, I've seen so much progress in so many areas. Why am I not seeing it here?
Yes.
Because like when I came in here, I had crippling anxiety and depression. Crippling, I had re-diagnosed and remedicated on so many different things over the years. And again, of course, like never taken those properly. And then those diagnoses were always done with a half truth. So like whatever I actually had and how bad it actually was, I don't think I'll ever know. And when I came in and I really dedicated myself to the program, the majority of these, I think, manifestations of anxiety and depression really went away from me. Right? Like I don't live in a chronic state of anxiety anymore. I didn't believe that I was living in a chronic state of depression anymore because the way that it manifested for me really did disappear. And, some other pillars of mine, you'll hear people say things that like, you know, untreated alcoholism looks a lot like depression or anxiety, right? And I do believe that.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was really able to kind of take a step back and look at what's been happening, because like all things considered, I don't have a single thing to be depressed about, right? I don't. My life is so good, like so abundantly good, that I have nothing to be depressed about. And I thought that maybe for this last 2 years, I've just been overworked, and I have been, right? I work too much, and that's been something that I've noticed as an issue. So I kind of connected this to just like maybe burnout, right? Like maybe I'm just tired.
Yeah,
right?
I've done that
but
too.
When I was able to kind of take a step back, and I thought it's been the short window of time that I felt like this, but like really it's been almost 2 years now that this has been pretty much a constant for me in the way that I feel. And if I really were to write it down on paper and look for a definition for it, it's depression, right? And while I don't think that I'm actually depressed, it just looks a hell of a lot like it. So like, where is it coming from? Right. And that's really kind of where this is all coming to a head for me right now, is that like, I really don't know. Right. I don't know. Maybe I actually am, you know, maybe the diagnoses weren't completely incorrect, and maybe my pink cloud maybe lasted a little bit longer than I thought it did for those first few years. Right. And maybe the buzz that I got from grabbing onto this book and this program, maybe that really outweighed the way that I was actually feeling for a while. Because like when I look back at it now, like I don't know what else I would call these last few years, right? Because like, you know, as far as like my career goes, I'm way more ahead in my career than I ever thought that I could be. You know, I just got married. I have the privilege of, you know, taking time when I want to go do things that I want to do. And I've had an abundance of men to work with, and I get to do really cool things with people. You know, the service I've been able to be a part of is like so heartwarming that like I have no reason but to feel full. So why don't I? Right. And that's kind of where I'm walking into this year is, you know, if that is the case, where is it coming from and how do I fix it? Right. Because I think whether this is a unique problem to me, or this is maybe a little bit more to do with stagnancy than I think that it does. Either way, you know, I don't want to be walking into year 5 feeling like this, right? Because I don't think that we have to. Right. I think that we end up feeling like this because we think that we shouldn't feel like this. So maybe I try and tell myself that I don't actually feel like it. I do think that there is a solution there. I'm just not 100% sure where it is. And for me, the idea that maybe it's not 100% contained inside of this book scares me a little bit, I think, right? Because for me, this has been the only solution that I've found that has worked.
Given you any relief. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I gotta be honest. It's actually, you know, that's why I was so excited about this topic. It's just, you know, nice to know that even like the shitty stuff that I go through, like it's just nice to know that I'm not alone. So I really appreciate you coming on and being vulnerable and talking to me about that. One of the things that came to mind while I was listening to you share that, and this is something that where I've kind of always known this. I started to figure it out more, but this is why I'm wondering if maybe I need to kind of make my own ventures. But like, I've always been a person that gets really excited about something new. If it's new, it's not out of my routine. I find that I get excited to get out of bed. Like I remember I had the Friday off, and then the Saturday we were going to the airport to go on vacation. And like my plan was, I've just been busting my ass. I'm going to sleep until noon on Friday. And then I think I was up at like 5:45 in the morning because I was so excited to get everything done that needed to be done so I could go on vacation. Now that I'm like off and know I'm going back to work in 4 days, I can't get out of bed. It's kind of annoying. But my point is, going into the program, doing the steps while it was uncomfortable, while it was fearful, it was new. And then I started to get it, and then I started to feel really good. And then all of a sudden they're like, here, take that book and go give it to someone else. And I was like, oh God, that's terrifying. But that was new. And I did it. And then in doing all of these things and applying these principles in all my affairs, not just in the rooms, in the meetings with my sponsor, but everywhere, this catapulted me to being able to, over a 4-year period, I think I was promoted 3 different times. And it was interesting because, like, the first time I was detailing. So, like, after 15 months, I'm like, there's only so many windows you can wipe before you're like, I'm done. And then I ended up moving over to be a lube tech because back then I just drug court wanted me to have a career. My parents wanted me to have a career. I didn't want to disappoint either of them. So I'm like, I'll do this. And it turns out I hated manual labor. I hated lifting tires. I hated everything about it. But my brain didn't even connect those dots. And I did that for like 8 months before realizing how miserable I was. I was sleeping on lunch breaks. Like, I didn't want to get out of it. It was brutal. And then my sponsor finally sat down and said, we need to pick away everything and figure out what's happening here. And I put my job at the bottom because I was so sure that wasn't it. We finally get through it. Then I find that out. So I go to my manager. I have a conversation, tell him what I'm looking for. And I was really, interested in advising. And then so eventually I got a chance to do that. And through each time that I did something different, the first few months was like exciting. Can't wait to get out of bed. What am I going to learn today? This is going to be great. Then I go through and then I got another promotion. And so every time I do something new, I feel really, really good. Last year, figuring everything out with Chase, that was new. That was exciting, doing all these things. Where I'm struggling now, and I actually remember when I got promoted last, I was going through a dip. And I remember going to a room and I was very excited to share with my fellows that I didn't even understand how much the mental affects the physical. Because I struggle with routine and I hated getting out of bed and I felt depressed all the time, all this stuff. And I'm like, now that I'm excited to learn something, it's like, I couldn't believe how much better physically I felt because I felt better mentally. And it was just this really great experience of constantly growing and learning. Where I've noticed my struggle is now, which is a shift, which kind of terrifies me because I haven't had this happen in sobriety yet, is I had a conversation with Chase just like 2 days ago. And he said, it sounds like you need to do something new. And I love you, but you really need to try to do something physical. You need to get exercise because it's like one of those things where I'm just like, not yet. Not yet. Still working on this. Not yet. But he was just like, you need to find something that you're passionate about. You need to find something that you get excited about. And that information should have been the exact piece of thing that I needed to get excited to go find something new like I have time and time again. Where I'm struggling right now is him saying, go find something you love to do. Sounded like so much work. It's not even funny. And I think that that's why I'm kind of in this like stagnant place where like, I've done episodes on here where I've broken down in tears being like, being on this side of it, it's so hard to watch people that aren't ready because I'm like, just take my hand. Just take it, come with me, do a couple simple things. Like, it's really just come with me. And now here I am on this weird side where I'm like, I know the things that I probably should or need to be doing. What's holding me back from doing it? And it's making me question a lot of stuff. So I really related to what you said about the idea that maybe not every answer is in the book is terrifying because I'm just like, it's making me realize how complex the mind and the body and the soul and all that stuff are and like everything else. But like I said, like my life as well, like it's so good. And I remember when I hit my 3 years or so, I remember saying like, I felt bad for saying it, but I said, is this what I got sober for? Is this what my life is supposed to look like? And then I dug in, did a bunch more work, and then I got all of these beautiful things in my life. And now I'm starting to just come off of that high again. And I'm like, is this what I got sober for? But even thinking it makes me feel guilty because my life is so fucking good.
And I think, and this is where then flop back into like, well, maybe the book is the only answer I need, because I suffer from almost the same thing, right? And I think that's where the stagnancy in my program came from, was like, I'm just bored now. I've done these things, and mind you, I haven't done them 100%. So like, how can I say I've really done them, right? But really, like 11 is my main problem area, right? Which then I think is this is going to be a really long-winded way for me to get to where I'm going here. But you know, I am big on the new. I do well with new, right? But like for me, you know, that's kind of like the VLT effect, right? I really like pulling that handle and seeing the wheels spin and see what I land on, right? But like when we break down like what I believe the spiritual malady is, it's like, well, like that is my, you know, has been my go-to solution in response to my spiritual malady for really my entire life, outside of drugs and alcohol alone, is that like that flashy light, you know, whatever that is, right? It always makes me feel better. So that then concerns me. Is this now more, am I still just dealing with the same problem? Is this just a spiritual malady issue, right? Because then when I look at now, you know, the things that came out of this last inventory, and not being sure maybe where I'm headed in terms of my relationship with God, it's like, okay, so like I'm lacking discipline in 11. I still get satisfied by things that were traditional ailments to my spiritual malady to begin with. So is my spiritual condition really where I think it is? And if it's not, maybe that is the solution. Maybe that is why I feel the way that I feel. And it's like, okay, so now what are my options, right? Because, you know, a big part of a lot of the pieces that came out of my inventory all ended up pointing back to the same things, where like I'm not disciplined, but I really get resentful at other people for not being disciplined, right? So like I've always been really good at the mirror resentments, right?
Yeah.
And this was a glaring one for me. So like if I'm not disciplined, and I've tried damn near everything in my life to get disciplined since I found, you know, this program this time around, why can't I? Right? Maybe it is something that's inherently wrong with my wiring, maybe. But maybe I just don't know what direction I'm walking in, right? And this is something that I'm really struggling with right now, because like I've kind of surrendered to the idea, and at this point, like I'm willing to kind of go back into all of those places that I swore off that weren't for me, to see if maybe I could find something that might be for me.
Okay. Because
like really, when this man told me this, it really rattled me. You know, I truly believe that I have come to believe in something, right? That I pray to something every single day. But when he challenged me on the idea that like, you know, could you possibly be praying to an idea? And I was like, well, no, because I believe in God. And he's like, okay, so what is it? And I was like, I actually don't know. Right? And I think that's okay for the first while, right? I think you can pray to an idea. You know, an exercise that we take people through when working through We Agnostics is really an exercise in that. It's like, if you're struggling with the idea of what God is, let's come up with like some things that God might be, right? And we take them through like a visualization exercise to try and come up with some things. And then in that visualization exercise, they come up with 3 words that they believe that God would be. Usually they're all pretty fluffy at the beginning, right? But like those fluffy ideas are kind of what's been my idea of God for the entirety of my recovery so far. And I don't think I felt challenged to look at that until I realized that like maybe this could be part of the problem. But like fundamentally, you know, I look at people that I know who, and I don't want to say just religion, different organized religions, because I think that it can be more than that. But I look at the people that I know that have found a path to God in whatever way that looks like. And I think about where their disciplines lie and what their connections look like. And more often than not, they look a heck of a lot different than mine do, right? So like maybe there's something there. And no matter how much we try to pick this book apart and say that it's not what it actually is, we're all aware of what time the world was in when this book was written, where these men came from and what they believed in. And whether we want to agree with that fact or not, the book does a really good job at cleaning it up and giving you the option to choose whatever you want. But all of them had a pathway to God, right? And to kind of strip that down and to come up with an idea of like, no, actually, you could choose your own, I think that's great. But when we look at the recovery rates out of the first 100 and the first thousands after, and we look at the recovery rates now, I'd be hard pressed to assume that no pathway to God might have a little bit to do with it, right? I think meetings and opinions and the current state of the world has a lot to do with it too. But back then, most of them ended up falling into the same category of faith. And, you know, at its core, that's not been for me. I've tried and I've tried and I've tried. But I've also tried in kind of some of the same places and finding that sort of faith. So I'm giving it one more shot. I am going to attempt to go to a little more unorthodox version. But I'm also going to continue to kind of spread out my spirituality in a few other areas. You know, Buddhism has always been really attractive to me. I tried going to, you know, some temples and stuff early on, and it just, the idea of conforming to something still feels icky to me almost.
Right. I get that.
And again, I admire people that can. I do find it an admirable trait because it's just not one that I'd been able to come to terms with. But the more I think about this, the more I'm starting to believe that like maybe my spirituality is just not where it needs to be for the problems that I have in my life today. Because again, that whole, you know, your problems are what you prayed for years ago, right? Like that's true. But it doesn't mean that the problems and day-to-day existence isn't going to happen, right? You know, the whole more money, more problems adage, right? It's, you know, life gets good and it comes with a whole new set of problems. And these are problems that I never had to deal with before, right? And that's scary. So I think, is it solvable with this book? Do I need more help? I really don't know, right? I really don't know. I think if I could really dedicate what I need to, I think, to reach this new epoch in my own journey with this program, I think that I could find resolve for a lot of the current ailments that I have. But I've also come to peace with the idea that, like, if I do need more that's outside of this, then it's okay to do that too, right? And the book told me that, right? The book said from the very beginning, like, you know, maybe it's worth looking at things outside of here if you believe that's something that you struggle with. I just looked down on it so strongly for so long because it just didn't work for me, and the book worked so well that
how could you not?
How could I not?
Yeah, I get that. I'm just really glad we're having this conversation. I really appreciate you. And, you know, it's something that I struggled with, God, a lot. After year 1 up to hitting year 3, I struggled a lot. And I think a lot of it had to do with just natural defects that I carry as well. I could never let anybody know that I wasn't okay after I passed 12, because it was my job to show you that the program worked. Because it did. But I felt that being vulnerable and open about struggles made me weak and suddenly meant that I wasn't doing the right things. And I held on to a lot of stuff for a really long time. And I remember in one meeting, I've talked about this multiple times, I just burst into tears, let it all out. Someone came up to me after, we had a beautiful conversation. And ever since then, now I am the crying Jenny that you know so well that has absolutely no issues getting really vulnerable and honest in any kind of meeting. Because now I see it as a strength. But I went through this really long period where it was really hard to be open about that. Now I'm very open about that with like my home group and in a meeting and stuff, but I'm starting to realize that I'm not having that same, I'm not giving myself a break outside of the room that I trust so well. So when it comes to just like the way that I feel about myself or the way I feel about my job or whatever it is, lately there's just been like, I've been kind of beating myself up, I think. Like, you know better than this. You know what the solution is. You should be doing, the shoulds. And it's just, life is a journey, and there's no such thing as you always hear that, like, there's no graduation from recovery. You're always doing it. You're always doing that. And I always knew that, but somewhere along the way, I knew enough of how to recite this book without actually reading the words that I thought it had become a part of me enough that I was good.
Right.
I really naively believed that I had it. And the more I believed that I had it, the worse this little down spiral has been. On the other hand, I think that it's really, really important that I openly say to you and to anybody else listening how grateful I am that this is my biggest problem, is that I'm trying to figure out how to be happy all the time, fulfilled all the time, helping other people all the time, and constantly excelling. What a great problem to have. I understand that 5 years ago, I couldn't go 3 hours without getting high. And anytime I slept, I woke up suicidal. I hated my life. I hated everybody in it. And I just wanted to disappear. What a beautiful life that I have today. And I'm not someone who's saying that I'm not aware of these things, that I'm not grateful of these things. The problems I have today are nothing like the problems that I had back then, which again, sometimes is part of the problem, right? These new things. I've never been good at finances. I blew all my money and then borrowed or stole money when I needed it. Now I have money, then I've been learning about how to manage it, and that's weird. It's weird. Like, I've had to go to several people, and I've had to go to my parents, and I'm like, what do I do? Like, how do I make sure that I stay responsible? Like, it's weird. But I think that it's really important that I say that I wouldn't have it any other way. I'm also really glad that I work a program enough to be gifted with awareness when things are off. Right? I never knew or understood how to cope or deal with that back then. And that's why drugs and alcohol was such a fitting solution. But today, I understand that the second I'm off, there's a flag that goes up and says, hold on, why? I don't feel good. Now, granted, lately, I go into self-pity for a little first. Oh, boo-hoo, why do I feel this way? But very quickly, I go, wait, hold on. What's happening? Why is this happening? What do I need to do about it? Reach out to somebody, figure it out, and kind of re-go from there. And I think that we wouldn't be doing anybody listening any favors to not say that, like, it's really great to be on this side, right? Multiple years in recovery and wanting to continually, level up and do well. Like, what a gift that you and I have. But it is interesting every time I go to a meeting that has birthdays. One of the bigger ones in Calgary, I went, I think for my birthday, and there was 9 1 years, 3 2 years, 1 4 year, 1 8 year, 1 10 year. And it was just, that was the first time that I remember really seeing, why is there such a lack of the later years? It's because a lot of times people just go stagnant and then eventually you stay still long enough, you just go backwards, right? And that's not a future that I see for myself, and not a future that I see for you. So,
this is kind of where I struggle though, right? Because then I start to feel ungrateful for the life that I've been given, to even feel uncomfortable, right? It's like, I've been given such a wonderful life. How dare I not feel grateful for where I'm currently at, right? And I don't think it comes from a lack of gratitude. It's just, it just is what it is. Mm-hmm. I had to recognize that something's just off, mm-hmm. right? But I think that there's still shame attached to that too, because either I shouldn't, or I'm ungrateful if I do, right? Mm. I'm stuck between two pretty potent camps of militant big book folks and other men that have kind of started to, while still working the program, doing some things outside of it, right? Mm-hmm. But more often than not, it's the voice of no, you've been given this life, be grateful for the life that you have, because nowhere in it does it say that everything's going to be happy, right? And I don't think that it's even realistic to assume that I should be happy all the time, right? But I think there's a difference between maybe having an off day, and then just having a period of time where maybe things just really aren't that good, right? And I think that both of those things are kind of the same. I think that we are still human, and I think that we're still able to have lower periods in our life, even if I am at, maximum spiritual fitness, right? So I think part of this is kind of destigmatizing that and understanding that, like, first of all, and I had mentioned this at the beginning, if we don't be transparent about this, and this is something that I really, I've used you as a big inspiration for, and it was around year 2, 3 for me that, like, I was like, what am I coming up here and quoting the big book for? When, like, I'm not doing well at all, right?
Yeah.
Or I'm going through something and I'm not practicing the program and I'm getting the results of that. Why come up here and pretend that, like, I'm doing great? Because if we all pretend like we're all great all the time, when things aren't great for somebody, they're going to be like, well, I'm doing something wrong, right? So I really started to shift into, like, okay, if I'm not doing great, because I think there's a big difference in coming up and maybe sharing where you're at and why you might be, right? So for me, it's like, if I'm struggling in a certain area, I can usually relate it back to a piece of the program that I'm maybe not doing well at the time. So that'll be kind of how I position it. I think there's a big difference between that and just coming up here and holding hostage a group of people and telling them how shitty your life is, right? So, like, that's not something that I try to do. But I think even furthermore now, as I continue to move through this year, I'm really feeling called to have some pretty blunt transparency about how I currently feel, maybe why I think I feel that way. In general, I try to stop quoting the book a couple years ago. I don't, and no one, we're not doing a big book study. I don't need to quote the book, right?
Yeah.
There are times where there are particular pieces of the literature that do apply very much to what I need to share, and then maybe I'll reference it. But, like, as a general rule of thumb, I really try not to today. But I think moving forward, I'm really feeling called to trying to be more transparent to the fact that, like, if I'm not doing well, I want to make sure that that's communicated, but really echoed with, why I might not be. Right. And really trying to sell the solution that way instead of just like, no, life's great. Just do the solution and you'll be fine. If you just do all 12 steps to the best of your abilities, you'll never be sad again and life will be great. And I think in trying to move in this direction, I think at least, like, I can rest peacefully at night knowing that, like, at least I'm trying to do my part to try and destigmatize this idea. And because I don't think anyone does it on, like, intentionally.
No, I don't think so.
Right. I think it's just part of this kind of understanding that, like, because we're supposed to be well, we should be well in front of people, right? And especially, where our home group is, we do often have a lot of new people that come to the meeting.
Yeah.
And to sit there and show them that life might not be great at 4 or 5+ years sober, I don't think does them any justice either. But again, I think there's a big difference in just going up there and saying, hey, my life's shit. And, like, okay, like, no, I'm struggling, but here's why, right? And I really think that, like, this kind of becomes our responsibility, and how much impact that has globally has probably very little to do with us. But at least I think if we do our part, and I do think that fundamentally you do a great job at this already, in just being transparent about where you're at, what you're going through, and how you're dealing with it. I think it really starts to create a culture where we can actually talk about how we're doing.
Yeah.
Right. And not that we have to be well all the time,
Yeah.
I don't put that burden onto my sponsees. My job is, when I show up and I pick up this book with another man, that I show up and be there for that person, right? Yeah. So that's not a burden that I pass down to my sponsees, but I think that's the only area where I should have some sort of veil of secrecy in this area. And I think that until we start to really make this more mainstream, that, like, we're just human and going through human things, I don't know how much we'll see this change. Right.
Yeah, I've been, man, like, I really relate to that too. And it's unfortunate that that just seems to be what comes through. Because I remember, I always struggled with reaching out. And my sponsor pulled me aside and said, you are not going to succeed if you keep trying to do this on your own. Stop that. Reach out if you need something. And I remember the first time that I needed her. I needed something. And I reached out to her. She didn't answer. And I waited 8 or 9 hours, and she still hadn't texted or called me back. So I called her, and she picked up, and I was angry. And I remember vividly being like, oh, so you do know how to answer your phone. And she's like, hello? And I was like, I called you. You didn't call me back. I needed you. Where were you? And bless her heart for being exactly where she was. And that's why God put us together. She had the ability, because I was offended. She had the ability to be like, okay, we clearly need to have a conversation. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, this is your fault. Like what's happening? And then she's like, okay, did I or did I not, when I took you on, tell you that your recovery is your own? It is your job to find a community of people that you can fucking lean on. And I was like, yeah, I sort of remember that. Kind of, sort of remember that. And she was like, okay, so if you couldn't get a hold of me, who else did you call? Nobody. Okay, so I'm not your God, and I'm not your 911, and I'm a human with a life and a job, and I do things. So if I'm unavailable, like it's your job to find someone to talk to. And I was like, well, I mean, when you put it like that, you're making it sound like this is all on me. I'm like, what the fuck? And I like remember this so well. And, you know, thank God I had that, because if I was just somebody who never reached out, or like if I didn't have that sponsor that was able to have the courage to have that conversation, maybe I never would have learned. But that conversation single-handedly taught me about what a sponsor is and what a sponsor isn't. And how all that works. And it's very difficult. I'm kind of going through something right now with somebody who's a little spiritually sick. And, you know, it's really hard to hear, I don't want what you have, when you're just unable to see that it's actually stuff you're going through, the way that your brain's working. But I really... It's so hard to have a grasp and a handle on the idea. Like I've been through at least 5 or 6 different issues with sponsees that just expect me to be perfect, to have every answer. And I think more recently have the ability to be loving, tolerant, and patient towards repeated offending of the same problem with zero willingness to do anything about it. Right. And it's really tough. And like, I'm going through something right now with somebody who I offered a solution to several times. They chose not to take it. And then I was never rude in any fashion, but I definitely lost patience. And so I ended up getting to a kind of repetitive thing of being like, well, are you going to get back to work or not? Like, what else do you want me to say? And then it kind of toppled over into this area where the expectation of us is to just, as sponsors, is to just be these perfect examples of human beings. And I'm sorry to say, but like going through the steps the first time, like that is the bare minimum to get out of being suicidal. Like, I don't think I really had a full understanding. Maybe I don't have a full of it, but I didn't have a good understanding of the book until I'd probably taken 20 people through it. So maybe this is a lesson for all the people out there that are really hard on their sponsors. Like, give us a break. We're people too. And guess what? I don't learn until I fuck it up. Right. It's through making the mistake and feeling the pain of that mistake that I grow. So everything I do with a sponsee is because I screwed up. I screwed up with a previous sponsee.
I don't pull any punches in working with other people. I'm very transparent about the fact that I know literally nothing. I know nothing. As soon as I think that I know something, I think I'm in trouble. You know, what I can do is relay the experience that I have in working these steps, both positively and negatively. And that's the experience that you'll get with me, right? For me, you know, that intro session ends up becoming the most important part of sponsorship, I think. You know, we have a pretty firm kind of outline that we take people through in that very first session before we even pick up the book of like what it'll look like to work with me. You know, I'm not your taxi driver. I'm not a sounding board for you. I'm certainly not a therapist, right? Really what I can offer you is questions related directly to the 12 steps, as that's the only thing that I truly have any means to speak about, right? You don't deserve my opinion. You don't deserve anything outside of my experience with this book because, like, first of all, my opinion's still fucked. I have no business giving my opinion on pretty much anything, right? But, like, especially when we start to stray into matters that are probably better suited by somebody who's trained to deal with them, I might be getting you into trouble by giving you an answer. And I think without the expectation laid out in advance, I think that can get tricky, right? Because I'm finally starting to understand the old timers, right? I think I've sponsored enough men at this point that like I'm starting to understand why people that have been around these rooms for so long end up the way that they end up when dealing with newcomers, right? Because like for me, I still struggle with firm. I'm not as firm as I probably should be. You know, at the beginning, I was absolutely not firm at all. And then due to the pillars that I put in my life who were super firm, I was like, now I have to be super firm. And it's just not in my wheelhouse. I'm not that kind of person. And then I kind of reverted back to like, well, if I can't be firm and I can't not be firm, I don't know what to do. But I think, you know, in working with just sheer volume and dealing with the same, we're all the same.
Yeah.
If you think that you're special, I guarantee you that you're not. We are all the same. We are all the same people.
Yeah.
And if we're all the same, that every time that I work with a new person, I get the same things that manifest in that person. After a while, it starts to feel a little bit like Groundhog's Day, right? So like, I don't have very much patience anymore for somebody that wants to continually come to me with a problem, for me to give the solution to the problem out of the book as I understand it, for them to not use the problem to come back and bitch about the problem again.
Yeah.
And for me, you know, that really only has a few orbits before it ends up being a much different conversation, you know, depending on the severity of the problem and how much, you know, this might be a really entrenched behavior in the person. You know, I'll maybe give it 4 or 5 rotations around the sun. But once it starts to come back, it becomes a much bigger conversation of like, okay, like I've given you the solution as I understand it. You've chosen not to use the solution. If you want to continue to come to me with this problem and get the same solution that you're choosing not to use, the conversation is going to look a hell of a lot like maybe this isn't the best fit for you.
Yeah.
Right. And that was not something that I was comfortable with at all at the beginning, even the idea of it. But, you know, one of my biggest pillars really broke this down to me in a way that like really starts to make sense. And, you know, if we have this relationship that you come to me with a problem and I tell you what I think the solution is to the problem, you choose to ignore it and then think that you can just keep coming back and complaining about the same thing, eventually it's going to create a culture where that applies then to everything that I would ever tell you, right? And it might not seem like that big of a deal if it's a smaller area of their life that they're struggling with, but I've seen it manifest into like, okay, well, like now there's something else that comes up. They come for advice, which I don't have any. All I have is a step to reference the solution to. And in doing that, it's like now what maybe might have been half applied at first isn't being implemented at all because that culture's been built, right? So it took me a while, but I've had a couple conversations over the last few years with other men of like, okay, like if you want to continue to do this, that's fine. Unfortunately, it's just not going to be with me, right? Because as soon as I start to think that like I am the person that can solve the problem, first of all, I think we're in big trouble.
Totally.
But second of all, if we just let people continue to come and use me as a therapist, you know, I'm not trained to do that either. So that in itself is a problem too, right? But I think this all just comes with experience, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. We just had a very similar conversation. I had to pull the plug on that one. But one of the things that I think is interesting is I say like 80% of what you say in an opening conversation with somebody. I don't know if people forget, or maybe I'm not firmly enough referencing it. I don't know. Something that came to mind was, I'm like, maybe I should like print out like a blue card or like a yellow card from the rooms. I hand it to them. Here's all the things I'm not. And if you come to me with stuff, I'm going to ask you to reference this card.
I've thought about getting a contract.
Right? Like, here. That's funny.
Because I think about, like, you know, thankfully I've been blessed with the supports that I've used, that, and they don't go for that, right?
Yeah.
I get one. If I call with a problem one time and they give me the solution one time, if I call a second time, the first question is going to be, well, did you do this thing yet? And if the answer is no, like, okay, call me when you do, and they hang up the phone. Right? It's as simple as that, right?
Which is fascinating and probably great. I haven't had that problem in a while, because I learned a very long time ago that every time I try to do something different than a spiritual offered solution from somebody that I appreciate their opinion, it hasn't gone well.
Right.
So for the last like 3 years, if I go to somebody that I respect their experience, I generally do it.
And that's why.
But that's a good idea. I should tell people that.
But that's where I think that, like, I think we've been blessed to have really strong pillars in our life, to really be able to help guide our recovery. And I think that idea that a sponsor is supposed to be the end all be all, you know, people talk about like a flat tire 5. I encourage my sponsees to go get like a flat tire 10 or 15, right? If you don't have 10 numbers that you can call at any time of the day, that you're not going to get at least one of them to pick up with a, you know, hopefully be able to field the solution for you, you're probably going to be fucked at some point, right? Because really looking at what the relationship with the sponsor is, really my only job is to read the book with you, right? And then to be able to pick up calls when I can to help you, right? But like anything outside of that, I think is really a delusion. And that's where building a really strong community around you comes from. I think that's where we've been really lucky to have the community that we do around us to learn from, right? And I feel like while this maybe has strayed off from like where the original point of conversation started at the beginning, I do think that there really is still a lot of connectivity to it. And I think that when we look at what it means to like continue to grow in recovery, right? This is kind of like the pinnacle of it, right? To get to a point that like we've learned as many tools as we can to learn. And now really what we have is like this idea of just kind of like running through it over and over and over again and kind of refining that edge, right? Which, you know, is great. And I will continue to improve in doing that. But I think that does kind of echo back to what the original point of conversation was, and that like, and that stagnancy, and that this is, I think, a big part of where it stems from, right? Is like, once you've worked with enough sponsees, you realize that they're all the exact same. So every time you work with a new person, the problems are the same. The book is the same. The process is the same. So like, really, it does start to feel a little bit like Groundhog's Day after a while.
Well, and you know what's fascinating is like being on vacation for 2 weeks and work, like I was so burnt out right before I left for vacation. So like I didn't meet a single sponsee for I think a week and a half before I left. And then I was gone for 2 weeks. And it's fascinating because I remember being like, I'm so exhausted. I don't have time to do this. I need a break. Like I need to go on vacation. By the time I got to the end of my vacation, my brain was like, holy shit, I need to meet with a sponsee. Like I can really feel the effects of not giving it away. But now that I'm back, I'm like, yeah, right. Because that's the same thing. It's becoming the same.
Yeah. Which, again, beautiful problem to have.
Beautiful problem to have.
But it's a problem nonetheless, right? And whether this is directly attached to my spiritual malady or not, and the fact that I do like new shiny things, right? Maybe that has something to do with it. But I think that in general, you know, I think for anybody that does work this diligently enough, it does get to a point where there's no way that this doesn't start to feel routine, right? And while it's a beautiful routine, it ends up becoming a routine, right? And I think we start to run out of ways to spice it up, right? So like, this is where I think it becomes ultimately so much harder. And I think probably at its core is the biggest reason why we see such a drop off in this period is if you do want to spice it up, it comes with a hell of a lot more work behind it, right? Whether that means trying to level up in whatever direction your spirituality is going in, or starting to really, start to reshape your disciplines, whether physical, mental, or spiritual, whatever that looks like. All of those things come with way more work than most of the things I've done up until this point, right? Which I think if I had to pick one thing as to why this is a drop-off zone, I think it makes sense that could be it, right? That being said, we're faced with the decision of like, do I do it or not, right? I'd like to think that I am in, the group of people that says, no, we're going to do it, right? But like, I don't know if I have another go at what I experienced heading into this winter in me again, It was incredibly uncomfortable, and I seen it coming, right? All the warning signs were there. I knew that we were entering the season of work that we were entering in, and I knew how bad it was going to be. And in knowing that, I could have prepared a hell of a lot better than I did. Self-reliance failed me, right? And then I'm in it, and I know that I'm in it, and I know what it would take to get out of it. But then it's like, okay, well, the pity party's here because like I'm too busy and work's too crazy, and I can't find the time to do this. So I'm just going to push through it, right? Because I can fix this, right?
God, this sounds just like me.
It's crazy. But this is what concerns me, is how many other people is this happening to without anyone really talking about it, right? Because again, we don't see a gap as strongly as we do in this area of years for no reason, right? And I think when you go back and you talk to anybody that had a significant amount of time that ended up going back out, usually they can relate it to one of a few things. But I think regardless of what went first or the biggest piece that maybe left their recovery, I think it all stems from something, right? And I think sponsorship for a lot of people is one of the first things to go, and probably due to, I think, and I'm going to use this word very, very lightly, but it does become mundane, understanding that every sponsee is fucking identical, right? So it's the only thing that makes sense why sponsorship is one of the first things to go for so many people with time, who will then, equate that to the reason why they believe they went back out. But at the baseline of that, there's got to be something, right? There has to be some sort of correlation, and for me, I think that this might be it, right?
And I think that I love that you brought that up, because I actually just had Shannon agree to come book a slot to come on and talk about her experience, having the amount of time that she had, what she went through, and going back out and coming back in, and now having over a year again. So I'm really excited to, and one of the reasons why I was attracted to asking her is because I've been struggling a little bit, right? So it was kind of one of those almost self-preservation, like, tell me what not to do, respectfully, right? But yeah, I'm excited to hear more about that as well. Well, I mean, maybe we could be a little accountability buddies for each other through the next year. And when we go through little dips, we can lean on each other, and maybe we should pedal to the metal and see what we need to do to level up, because I think we're both more than capable of doing that. And then maybe we could get together in a year and tell everybody what we learned.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
I think we got a path forward at least.
Yeah.
And again, if nothing more, that's the biggest gift of doing this work, is no matter how uncomfortable it might get or can get, and maybe it might get much more uncomfortable this year, I don't know. Being able to do this without ever having to even truly think about going back to drugs and alcohol is truly incredible.
It is.
Yeah. We got a beautiful life.
We have a beautiful life.
Yeah. Let's
figure out how to hit the next level of beauty.
Yeah, let's do it.
Amazing.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for coming on. This has been really nice. You always know you're not alone, but sometimes it's really easy to feel alone. So knowing that I have someone going through the same kind of stuff, I appreciate you.
I appreciate you. Let's do it.
I almost made it. That's twice. That's twice on this one.
Technically.
God.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
We'll see you in a year.
Yes, you will.
Bye, guys. Peace.